Our next guest is Steve Young. He's no stranger. He's a Hall of Famer, Super Bowl champion, and now is you see him on Monday Night Football with ESPN. Steve, thanks so much for joining us, Mark, to make the Hall of Fame case.
Patience with me.
That's all right.
3 different starts. I got kicked out of my office by my wife. I couldn't find the right time. I mean, you guys are patient. Nice work.
Well, we know that you're busy, so we just appreciate your time to help us, because the reason we're here is to help make the case for Roger Craig to be in the Hall of Fame. It's long overdue. And so I want to start off by saying you're still very involved in the football community, the NFL community. Do you ever hear anything that might give us some idea of why Roger is still not in the Hall of Fame? Or do you have any idea yourself?
It's hard. I've watched this now for 25 years, I guess. And the problem is that once you miss the window and then age out, then things get really hard, because there's just more and more great players coming.
Yeah.
And so, it becomes a numbers game, and it's unfortunate. And I think there's also, I don't know. I mean, the great teams, the 49ers are during the 80s and 90s are one of the great runs of football history, right? Pittsburgh and the Patriots now. And so the Hall of Fame needs to pay that off. You know what I mean? And so the only thing I can think of is they feel like they paid it off in some way. Like, oh, we did our work and we got to just wake them back up, to the reality that there were Hall of Fame, there were 5 Hall of Fame players on that team, that there were 6 Hall of Fame players on that team, regardless of whether you think, the Pittsburgh Steelers teams, I think that there's probably 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 through those, that Pittsburgh Steeler run,
right,
in the 70s and the early 80s. And so that's 8 or 9, maybe 8 or 9, I don't know. So, clearly we haven't hit that limit yet. So,
yeah.
And so I don't know. And then it really is 39 writers like yourself, media people who are voters who decide it. And so we're not, this is not a publicity, this is not a broad-based voting. We're not trying to sway lots of people. We're trying to sway 39 people.
Right.
And hopefully they'll watch.
Is there anything to this East Coast bias? We hear that a lot, especially with teams and players on the West Coast. Is that a real thing, or is that just more of an excuse?
No, I think that there's. I don't think that people on the East Coast realize it. When we talk about it, we feel it, but they like, what? What? You're crazy. And I think what it is most of the football teams are kind of Chicago and East. There's a handful of teams in the West. And the truth is, other than when the 49ers are great, or the Rams pop up, or the Raiders pop up, or even Seattle pops up, that's not, it's just, the bias is more just the weight of this, of how it tilts, right? And so when the 49ers were great, I think it helped just wake people up to West Coast football. The Raiders did that early. We did it for a long time. Seattle's done a nice job here and there, and the Rams did won a championship. So, and Denver. So Kansas City, I don't know how they look at it, but it's the bias is really just a numbers game, and what teams have the weight. You know what I mean? And it's weird. Like Dallas is an East Coast biased team. Like they get it. They're in the East Coast, and they're in the NFC East, and they can play anybody. It's a big game. You're like, well, why?
Right.
No. Why do we care about that game? They're terrible. But it's just the Giants, anyone in Pittsburgh. It's just. I think it's just. I don't think it's intentional. I think it's just human nature.
Yeah. Last year, I wrote a story for 49ers Webzone that you were a part of where we made the case for Roger Craig with some information from Larry Krueger, who at that time was with KMBR. And when I got the statement from you, and this podcast series is being built around that story, you said Roger was a thermostat player. His talent and spirit raised us all when we lagged. What do you mean by that? How did he raise the temperature of the team?
Roger was high knees and high spirits. Like that's just the knees are, I think, are metaphor for how he lived his life. And if you see Roger today, same thing. Like, hey, what are you doing? Where are we going? What's happening? And that's a natural God-given talent gift of spirit that Roger has, and I always will have. And I think that's great teams need all kinds of people, and Roger played a unique role. The thing that I think historically the thing that creates the most momentum for Roger to be voted in by those 39 is to make the case that where football has gone today, Roger was the back that started it all. Like the idea that in the West Coast offense, you needed someone who could line up in all the positions, who could run it from the eye, who could catch it on the wide, could line up in the slot, like all the things. And you look at the death of the eye back, the death of the split backs, like the guys that couldn't do that can't play football today. And so you just don't want to be on the ash heap of players that are positions and styles that are dead. Mm-hmm. Like they're just gone. And the eye back is dead. So I would not want to be, any back today that can't. They're all leaving the game. They're all getting, they're all going away quickly in the last 4 or 5 years. There's only a couple of eye backs left, and I don't think they're going to be catching a job unless they can transition to a Roger Craig type of game. Right. And so in that way, I think when you're voting for the Hall of Fame and you see you have Hall of Fame credentials and you were the founding member of what became the profile of exactly what a running back needs to be today, I think there's a lot of energy in that. It's like, pay that off, pay that uniqueness that you brought to the game that was looked at as an anomaly and maybe a reason not to be voted in back 20 years ago. But today, an absolute reason to be voted in because the game came to Roger Craig. Yeah. The game today has come to him. And so I think that's a statement for the 39 voters to think about, like, pay that off. Because because the Hall of Fame running backs today are all going to be Roger Craig kind of players, just by nature.
Ronnie Lott said that whenever you're the first to do something, that means a lot. And of course, Roger Craig was the first running back to score 3 touchdowns in a Super Bowl, the first 1,000. And so I think that rings home that whenever you're the first to do something, as Ronnie said, that really means a lot, and as you have mentioned, should be considered. What did my last question for you is really a 2-part question. What did getting into the Hall of Fame mean to you? And along those lines, since Roger Craig has had to wait so long, what do you think it would mean to him to be elected to the Hall of Fame?
Well, so much of the game, there's always 2 things that you hold in suspense. There's the sense of team and a sense of, I got to make a career for myself. And, and doing both those is an athletic event. And I think the Hall of Fame pays off that I made a career for myself. You know what I mean? It's like, I think that's why it's 5 years later. It's like, it's not necessarily, you get there with a lot of help and a lot of great players around you and all that. We get that in football. But I think that sense that you start singularly as a college player and you want to go try to make a career, and you made that career, and at the end you made it a Hall of Fame career is pretty profound. It's very, very meaningful. For me, particularly, we talk about, doing things differently. I mean, I got kicked out of Tampa Bay because I was a scrambler, lefty, and they hated players like me. Coaches couldn't stand it, and they couldn't see any of the possibilities or and with Bill Walsh, not only he see possibilities, he saw an advantage. And that was, so, paying that off to kind of forging new territory. How many times did I hear about being left-handed or being a scrambler? And I was like, geez, how many passing titles do I need to win before you stop saying that? But because it was just done so differently, they couldn't register the excellence at the position because it looked different than the way they thought it should look. Mm-hmm. And I say that about Roger Craig earlier, but I have to say myself, like, the game's come to me. The guys that are going to rule the NFL for the next, 10, 20, 30, I have no idea. But the game has become so much more wide open for the quarterback. And you've got to be able to get all those free yards that are out there and first downs and touchdowns. And if you don't, you're not going to win Super Bowls. And so in that way, that's what the Hall of Fame for me is very, very meaningful, because I think it said, hopefully, to all those guys coming that, despite, I don't want to say discrimination. I just say the lack of understanding mm-hmm. for the capability. Because the truth is, once you could pair excellence in the pocket and running, you couldn't be stopped. That was the best thing going. And that's what Patrick Mahomes realizes today, Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, all those guys. Lamar Jackson's trying to learn how to become that sophisticated passer, because you can see how he can run. And any young player is going to have to kind of match that. So that's what the Hall of Fame meant to me.
Yeah, and just like you were something different, Roger Craig was as well. And as you've put it well, that the Hall of Fame needs to pay to come good on that. Steve, thanks so much for your time, for helping us make the case for Roger Craig.
Well, thanks for caring about Roger. Roger's somebody you want to take care of. Roger is. We opened the podcast talking about the spirit of Roger Craig, and it just feels like a bust in Canton would, like, he'll make the bust in Canton more alive and rich because of who he is and who he will be. So, yeah, good luck.
He definitely deserves it for sure. Right.
Take care, Mark. Thanks so much.
We have now with us the great Ronnie Lott, 4-time Super Bowl champion and many years the teammate of Roger Craig. Ronnie, thanks so much for joining us and helping us make the Hall of Fame case for Roger. Wanted to ask you a question. It's been decades since he retired from the NFL, and yet he still isn't in the Hall of Fame. Why do you think he's not yet in?
Well, that to me is one of the mysteries. And the reason it's one of the mysteries is that when you're the first to be able to do what he was able to do, and meaning that when you're the first to catch, so many passes in a season, and you're the first to do certain things in life, I've always felt like, and John Madden used to say, when you're the first in line to do whatever you've done, that means that you're a Hall of Famer. Right. And when John Madden would say that, it always reminded me of how many people that have been the first to do something. And Roger Craig obviously was the first to do that. And then the other thing that I think is really important is that we sometimes forget about the tenacity of what it takes to play in the NFL and what it takes to play offensive football. And what I mean by that is that when you think about Roger, a lot of people look at Roger and they forget that he was a great running back. He just didn't receive the ball, but he was a great running back. And there were times for us, especially late in games, when Bill Walsh would always say, we got to win the fourth quarter. And the way we're going to win the fourth quarter is we're going to run the football. And to me, that was the thing that I thought that Roger Craig did a wonderful job of being able to run the ball in the fourth quarter. And we won a lot of football games. So that was a Hall of Fame kind of statement, because a lot of our games we won because of how Roger could run the football. And then the other thing that I think is that, to me, what really jumps out is I've seen other backs that have just recently gone into the Hall of Fame that have said, and people have said what they've done, and they've used it as an attribute for how many passes they've caught and how many things that they were able to do with Peyton Manning or with other quarterbacks. So to me, again, that's what I try to measure, people by. And I think the other thing for the 49er fans, and really for all football fans, is that when you go to Nebraska, you learn to love something. And so right. Roger and I roomed from his rookie year. And what I loved is I never met a day that he didn't want to be a great football player.
Yeah.
And so, man, I got a chance to wake up every day on the road with the excitement of understanding how much he loved the game of football.
Wow.
And that, to me, a lot of times, your roommate that you have, you can be measured by that person. And you can be measured by the person that you room with in training camp. And I roomed with Roger in training camp. And I can assure you, there was never a moment that Roger Craig did not want to play ball. and so that's why I'm laughing right now, because, when you go to Nebraska, man, your heart and the things that you think about and the things that you want in your life is really around not having a lot of things, but doing certain things great. And Roger not only has done that with his post career, I mean, the company that he worked for and the things that he's done after his career, you can measure it because he was always willing to get to work and ready to show people how much he wanted to work for the company. And that's the other piece, that attribute to me is something that he has brought not only to the game of football, but to his life. And I'm a benefit from that, because there were so many days that I found myself going, okay, let's go. If you're ready to go, let's go. And so that's the beauty of being around a guy like that. Yeah.
Did he ever get you on that hill?
You know what? He never got me on the hill. And that hill is legendary for a lot of reasons. Obviously, he and Jerry Rice were amazing at running the hill. And I had a chance to witness the hill and look at it. But I never had a chance to run it. And, you just said something there that made me think of another person that I used to train with. And his name was Coach Parks. And Coach Parks used to always, talk about people who worked out, who trained, who found themselves in the off season wanting to get better. And when you think about Roger and you think about Jerry and the dedication that they had for how they would work out in the off season and the things that they would, try to push each other to have that excellence. And so there are so many things that Roger did off the field to show how much he cared about the game. And so those are Hall of Fame moments, not just because of what you do when you show up and make, 4 or 5 catches, or you make, long runs. It's the Hall of Fame attitude that you have off the field and the things that you want to do to be great. And that's the kind of characteristic that Roger brought. And that's the characteristic that Jerry brought, is that they wanted to be great.
Yeah.
They didn't want to be guys that just showed up. They wanted to be great. And every time I'm around them, when I see them, there is nothing but joy and happiness because of his innocence of wanting to be just a person who loves people.
Yeah, and I've heard those stories about him being stopped in the airport and how he not only will stop and sign autographs, but that he actually will take time and ask questions. You know, how are you doing? How did you become a 49ers fan? How long have you been? And so that says a lot about him. I spoke with Mike Singletary about this, and Mike said that he puts Roger Craig up there higher than any of the running backs that he played with or against. And he said that includes Walter Payton, that Roger Craig is right up there on that level. Why is it? And he mentioned that not only was he a class guy, but he said that the reason he was so hard to defend is that he was such a distinct mismatch when you played him, because you didn't know if he was going to fly by you or run over you or whatever. As one of the greatest defensive players ever, why was Roger Craig, or guys like that who are a mismatch, why are they so difficult to defend?
They're difficult because of how they are able to attack you. And so think about what Mike just said. Mike is one of the greatest linebackers ever to play the game. I met Mike when he was at SMU, and I know a lot about his intentions of what he was trying to do when he would attack people. But that's how, when you're attacking people and when you're trying to bring people down, the bigger question is, what are you trying to get at? And what are you trying to do to get the person down? The hardest part in life is attacking people and tackling them and getting them down. And I think one of the toughest parts for anyone that plays the game of football, no matter how good you are, is that when you look at Debo doesn't necessarily look like he's a person that's going to attack you, but what he does is that there's an emotion that right before he hits you, there's an emotion that he brings, that emotion allows him to find a way to not only attack you, but to almost get you to almost bounce off of you. And so that emotion that he brings in that situation is invaluable. And that kind of emotion is the same thing that Roger would bring. And one of the things that I loved about how you bring that kind of emotion is that you can do that not only with the shake and bake, but you can also do that when you actually get your knees up and you're running high and all the things that you do. And so the question is that there's more to how people are being brought down. And that's one of the things that I loved about when you watch certain running backs, and everybody says, well, how did that guy get that? How did that guy get that yard? He's the only person that can actually get that yard. There's an emotion that a lot of guys bring that allow them to be able to say, for a yard, I'm good at this. Matter of fact, I'm even great at getting that yard because I understand that that's all I need. And my point is that when you think about Roger Craig, he had all of those kind of emotions and situations where when he had to make a move or he had to have his knees where he would run them to a point where they're high, or he learned certain things at Nebraska about how to break tackles. And my point is, we think that when we see people that miss tackles or make tackles, that it's just an automatic.
Yeah.
That's further than the truth. What it is that when you have a Hall of Famer like a Mike Singletary, there's a reason why Mike has a Hall of Fame attitude about attacking certain situations. And that's where when you have a guy like Roger Craig and when you have somebody like Walter Payton, that you start to find ways that in practice, you start to sit there and you start to measure and understand what you got to do to bring those people down. And my point to you is that that's the kind of student of the game. The student of the game is always trying to find ways to measure themselves to make sure that when you do play against a great running back like Roger Craig, that you can find a way to bring him down. And if you can't find a way, he's going to show you why he is a Hall of Famer. And that's the thing that I love about Roger. Roger didn't take plays off. Mm-hmm. Roger didn't take moments off. Roger, I mean, if there was ever a person who doubted that Roger took a moment off, that was not the case, because that emulation of him and he and Jerry trying to find ways to push each other in practice, that was real. That was like something that the both of them took a lot of pride on, in terms of making sure that they found themselves making the effort of saying, we're going to do everything we can, every practice we can, to be the best we can.
Yeah. Yeah. And Mike Singletary mentioned the same thing, that Roger Craig never took plays off, that he would run over you, then help you up. And if you made a tackle, you made a good play, he would actually pat you on the back and say, hey, good job. So talk about how he was just a class act all the way around. You mentioned that you were roommates with him. How much does it mean to him to get enshrined in Canton?
Great question. And when you said that, it took me back to the times that we would talk about how he grew up and how he, felt about the game of football. How when he would wrestle and being a wrestler, in his hometown, and so there's a lot to that story of the essence of why Roger Craig is a Hall of Famer. And the reason I say that there are so many elements that he brought to the game, and that he brought to our team, and the standard that he brought to our team, the pursuit of what he wanted to do to make sure that he could be a part of our team, the excellence of how many passes he caught. Those things to me remind me of a kid who every day wanted to go out and make sure that he never dropped the ball. He wanted to make sure that he never let any of his teammates down. Hall of Famers are not just about the plays you make. Hall of Famers are about people who try to find ways to exceed the people that they're around, to show them that this is what the game means to them. And so when you asked me that question just now about knowing him and being around him and being a person who appreciates the game, even when I see him now, that everything that he put into the game, he meant every moment. He didn't, I have this saying, exhaust life. Roger Craig exhausted life. He exhausted every moment that he played on the football field. And he was intentional about doing that in a way that made all of us better for so many reasons. And the reason I say for so many reasons, it's the guy who is sitting in the corner who is not necessarily ready to go. And here's Roger right there pumping him up, getting him ready to go. And those are the things that he brought to our team that, as they would call him, Catfish, and some of his nicknames that he had, I'm thrilled and honored that I had a chance to play with a guy who loved the game, and who loved waking up the next day ready to go, and who loved, trying to find ways to make sure that I was ready. And those kind of things to me, you never forget. I'll never forget what he did to help me get to where I got to. And so I'm trying today to make sure I pay my respects and pay it back to him, because as Mike said and others have said, Roger Craig deserves to be in the Hall of Fame.
That's right. And that's a great endorsement coming from one of the greatest players in NFL history. Ronnie, thanks so much for helping us make the Hall of Fame case for Roger Craig.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. As I always say, hey man, exhaust every moment. And thank you for doing that for Roger.
My pleasure. My next guest is three-time Super Bowl champion Brent Jones, my personal favorite tight end, but that's a different story. Brent, thanks so much for joining us and helping us make the Hall of Fame case for Roger Craig.
Oh, thanks, Mark. It's great to be on, and always great to support a great player that was certainly transformational in NFL history.
Speaking of which, it seems from some media that we've talked to that, including some that are Hall of Fame voters, that their concern for Roger Craig is that so much time has passed and there are younger voters coming in, and that some of these younger voters didn't have the opportunity to watch the impact that Roger Craig had, not only on the 49ers, but on the NFL, and the fact that today there are players that they know well that have fashioned their game after Roger Craig. So what kind of impact did he make on the 49ers, on Bill Walsh's offense, and on the championships that you guys won?
Well, Roger was instrumental in the success of the 49ers throughout the 80s. What he brought to the table with Bill Walsh's guidance was an impact that at the time no other running back had in the league. A big part of that was the way that he fit into the West Coast offense. Roger, as a running back, running the ball, was punishing, was powerful, was quick, was elusive, was all the things that you want in a running back. And the game was much more of a run-first game back then. So he, as a standalone running back, was as good as anybody playing during the 80s. When you look at him and what he brought as a receiver out of the backfield, it's weird because at the time, there weren't a whole lot of running backs making an impact whatsoever, catching the ball out of the backfield. What Roger did was really change the way offenses played in the 80s, with running backs becoming much more of a weapon out of the backfield. Roger was a very precise route runner, ran great routes, caught the ball so well. And for him to amass 1,000 yards receiving the same year that he had 1,000 yards rushing is something that at the time was so mind-boggling that you almost couldn't comprehend it. And so I think that these younger voters and people that look at statistics only, which nowadays is almost everybody, they gloss over a whole era, which was really the 49ers era in 1980, and Roger was leading the charge on that team.
You came to the team in what year?
1987.
1987. And so you come into a team that had already won a couple of Super Bowls, and you have Joe Montana, you have Jerry Rice there. And so I'm sure coming in, you notice guys like that and Ronnie Lott. What do you remember about Roger Craig? I mean, he had the big eyes when he would run. He had the high legs. What did you initially notice about him?
Well, with Roger, he's such an impressive specimen and such a good guy, just easygoing, fun-loving off the field. But what I noticed right away was his work ethic. And it was really interesting because you expect people to work hard at the NFL level, but he was above and beyond anybody that I had come across at that point. And the thing that stood out the most was other players were patterning their workouts after Roger and what Roger brought to the table, even though he wasn't the longest tenured 49er at the time. And so to see Jerry Rice say, I want to pattern my workouts after Roger Craig and Ronnie Lott and Dwight Clark and all these guys, it really put him in a leadership role in terms of the way that you prepare for a game, the way that you get ready for a season, the punishing way in which you work out so you can deliver that same punishment on the field to opponents. I think Roger really set the standard there.
You blocked for him for a handful of years. You ever catch those high knees in the back or anything like that?
Man, oh man! Well, I've got a few grazes before, but those high knees did more than their share of damage. Whether it was guys' arms, shoulders, ribs on the opponents, or even catching a guy that was getting too low under the chin, and the way that he kept those things churning, it was remarkable. And I don't think we've seen a running back like that since Rodgers' era, and just the way that he punished, he had those legs constantly churning, and those high knees, man, they would bring some heat for sure.
Yeah, he definitely had his own unique style of running. What do you think that it would mean to Roger Craig? You know him well. After all of the years that he's had to wait, what do you think that it would mean to him to get into the Hall of Fame?
You know, I think it would mean everything at this point in his life. You know, a great player on the field, a great person off the field. I think he's accomplished pretty much everything other than this last phase, which would be to get into the Hall of Fame. And I think it would just be icing on the cake for him, and just you know, kind of the perfect definition of a career that everybody aspires to, but he's just so close to. And it's interesting because you look at some of the dominant teams of the 70s and the 80s and 90s, and there's more than fair share of Cowboys and Steelers in. And it seems like the 49ers are underrepresented significantly compared to those two legendary franchises. And for whatever reason it was, maybe not enough voters on the West Coast, maybe writers falling asleep, maybe the lack of writers' intensity that would pound the table for their guys. Somehow, some way on the West Coast, we don't have what it takes, it seems, to get players in. And so that's been a frustrating component of all this.
Yeah. I did this series obviously is based on the story that I wrote for 49ers Webzone last year. I did a follow-up to that where I talked to Mike Singletary. We got a statement from Harry Carson, and then found statements from several other coaches and players who played against Roger Craig or coached against Roger Craig. Mike Singletary put him right up there with his teammate Walter Payton, and even went as far as to say, I actually put him higher than Walter Payton. There were a couple of coaches, John Robinson and Dan Reeves, who at some point in the 80s, and I think they both were at different times. One was earlier in the 80s, one was later in the 80s, where they both had said, Roger Craig, I'm paraphrasing, but Roger Craig is the best running back we have in the game right now. Of course, John Robinson coached Eric Dickerson. Was there a time, or was it throughout the decade, that you guys thought that very thing, that we have the best running back in the NFL right here on our team?
You know, I think there were definitely times and years that we felt that way, and I think it was definitely true. And you look at the two names that you mentioned, Dickerson and Payton. I mean, those guys, you know, stand so high in terms of people's awareness of the Hall of Fame, and Roger was right there. And it's a little bit of a head scratcher when you look at those two players and their careers and the teams that they were on, and you compare Roger. And so I think there's more than a handful of people that are a little befuddled, but yeah, to have a couple of those legendary coaches come out and say exactly what so many people have thought, it really makes a difference and an impact. And so I really feel like it's just a matter of time, and it's been a long time, but it feels like there's a little bit of a wave going, Mark, and you've been instrumental in that as well.
Well, I appreciate that, but for me, it's just about letting people remember who Roger Craig is and what he accomplished. And it's guys like you helping endorse him that really make a difference. Brent, thanks so much for your time, and thanks for helping us make the Hall of Fame case for Roger Craig. Thanks,
Mark. Appreciate all you do, and let's go, Raj.
I am thrilled to welcome Carmen Policy, the former team president and CEO of the 49ers. He was there for all 5 championships, helped build the dynasty that they called Camelot in those days. Carmen, thank you so much for helping us make the case for Roger Craig.
Well, thank you very much, and it's a pleasure being with you, Mark.
It's definitely our pleasure. I remember you telling me last year when I was writing this story for 49ers Webzone, which this podcast is based off of that story. And I remember you telling me that back in the day, you were part of the interview process for Bill Walsh and actually helped write up his first contract. That is really cool history for a 49ers fan like me. What did you realize that you had? What you guys had at that point? You know, that you're hiring Bill Walsh, who became one of the greats, or was it just like, hey, hopefully he turns into something good?
What you have to realize is that on a particular night in early January, 1979, that two guys in their 30s managed to find their way to San Francisco. And there we are, Eddie and I, Eddie DeBartolo and myself. And I'm a couple years older than him. And he was about 32 or 33 then. And we're sitting in his condo thinking about this interview the next night of this fella coaching Stanford, who is old enough to certainly be our much, much older brother, if not our father, and who he is and so forth. And I have to really tell you, Eddie was sold on him. He felt from day one, and he fought a lot of pushback from a variety of people who felt that Bill Walsh wasn't head coach material in the NFL. And including, by the way, Ed's father, who was a big fan of Paul Brown's, who, as you know, world famous with the Cleveland Browns and the Cincinnati Bengals and some of the other big time names in football. And then all of a sudden that next night when he walked in the room and filled it with his presence and was magnificent in the way he presented himself and the way he presented his vision for an organization. And Eddie made up his mind right then and there. No one was going to change it. And I was part of it. But I have to be honest with you, I was right there with Eddie. I was so spellbound that to me, I thought, wow, this guy, he's either from central casting in Hollywood or he was made special in heaven to come and create, for want of a better term, one of the greatest franchises in all of professional sport.
Yeah.
And it was pretty impressive.
That's an amazing story. And of course, Walsh started building this team, and he started with guys like Montana and some of those guys. But in 1983, he drafted a running back out of Nebraska named Roger Craig. How did that come together, and how long did it take Bill Walsh to realize, whoa, I've got something special, or did he just see that automatically?
Well, I think all of Bill's coaches who were involved in the evaluation of running back personnel, and all of the personnel people in the building saw Roger as kind of special. He always has been totally dedicated to fitness, physical readiness. He had a very good reputation as an individual. He had great work ethic. The reviews that came from his coaches and from some of the other, I must tell you, from some of the other players in Nebraska just were glowing. And that really pushed him way up. Mm-hmm. But I also think it was Walsh who saw this versatility factor that he could incorporate into an offense that he was always, that he was already in the process of developing, and give it an even greater dimension and more alternative firepower with a talent like that, if the talent could be developed along the lines that he needed it developed. And again, keep in mind, Roger wasn't just some slippery, slick, fast, juking tailback. He was also a fullback.
Right.
Matter of fact, if I'm not mistaken, I think he's gone to the Pro Bowl as both a fullback and as a running back or a tailback.
Yep, the only one that's ever done that.
Yeah, is that so? Okay, I wasn't aware of that, but I knew he went there and he was a fullback, and he went there, a smasher, and he went there as a true running back. Although I think he could have, based upon his record, also gone as a receiver. But I think Bill sensed something, but may not have known fully what he really had acquired when he took Roger in, I think it was the third round in 1983.
Yeah. Now, he definitely changed the offense. Bill Walsh has even said as much. He told Matt Mayoko that he wasn't able to fully use his offense until he had Roger Craig. We all saw what he did, but one of the things that people hold against him in regards to the Hall of Fame, there are a few arguments against. If he doesn't have the eye-popping stats that some did, but he played with Jerry Rice, so who's going to have the eye-popping stats when they play with Rice? But one of the other things is Roger is the fumble in the 1990 NFC Championship when the Giants recovered the ball and went down and kicked the field goal to go to the Super Bowl. What do you say to people who use that argument, one play, against Roger Craig being in the Hall of Fame?
I think it's an argument that should be decried and should never be used. I think it's an argument that if someone tries to make it, they're belittling themselves, because it's a specious argument. Mm-hmm. It should have no value in a process as important as the determination as to whether or not an athlete is admitted to the Hall of Fame. However, I've come to this personal opinion that fumble for that game, as momentous as it was, with all of the drama that preceded the NFC Championship contest against the Giants, including the drama with the Giants and Parcells and the big Monday night game that was classic. It's one of the NFL classics that occurred during the latter half of the season. I think it left a bad taste in the memories of people. And unfortunately, you talk about perfect storms sometimes. The opportunity to remove that taste was not there when the season was over, and free agency had hit. And unprotected players, including Ronnie Lott, Roger Craig, go off into other team environments. They're no longer part of the family. They're no longer part of the 49ers. And it just seemed to me that Roger kind of got lost in the process. I don't think his career was, spectacular after that. So it wasn't something that would have allowed him to bring his own sunshine into his area of darkness, so to speak. And then when things calm down and heads should be dealing with proper arguments rather than specious arguments, he didn't have the champions to stand up for him like Bill Walsh, who would have had a voice and who would have had a voice that would have been listened to if Bill were in a position to be the advocate that he was capable of being.
Right.
And even Eddie was leaving the 49ers, and new ownership stepped in. And there was nobody to pick up the mantle. There was no one there to stand up and say, hold it. You realize who this man is and what he did in his career and what he meant to the 49ers and how he changed professional football in terms of the offensive game that's played then and now. And he got kind of lost in the way. Everybody easily found their way to Joe Montana, Steve Young, Ronnie Lott, Jerry Rice. And, it just kind of fell in. But nobody was there. And Roger wasn't the type to want to pound his chest and reach out and try to promote himself, even privately. It's a long way of going around it and just say it's just an unfortunate set of circumstances started by an unfortunate event in a game that none of us could have anticipated, and all of us still feel the sting of today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you make a good point, especially when you think about Charles Haley leaving the 49ers and going to the Cowboys. And he won, 2 more Super Bowls with them. He won 3 more Super Bowls with the Cowboys. And yet it still took him a while to get into the Hall of Fame. And so it is easy to see how a player can get lost in the voting and that kind of process. What do you think, if you were given a platform to present you are given a platform, because this podcast is going to be presented to all of the senior Hall of Fame voters. So for those that watch, what would you say is the reason or reasons that Roger Craig belongs in the Hall of Fame?
Well, I think you have to look at the total package. Was he effective at every single thing he did on the field? Was he effective at every single thing he was called upon to do once he took the field? Did he change the dimension, I'll call it, and the effectiveness of what we call the West Coast offense and the Bill Walsh creation in terms of how the game on the offensive side of the ball was going to be changed? And there's no doubt about it. Mm-hmm. And to suggest that he was blessed with this world famous coach and great quarterback who went directly into the Hall of Fame, and Jerry Rice, who came after he was there. If I'm not mistaken, Roger had already been had already won 2 Super Bowls by the time Jerry came, didn't he?
He had won 1. Roger came in 83 and Rice came in 85. So Roger Craig had won.
Well, okay, you're right. They won. We had won 2.
Right.
Roger had only played in 1.
Right.
But he had already been a significant factor in that game, by the way.
Yes.
At Stanford.
He definitely was.
And you could make the argument and reverse it and say, Bill Walsh's offense wouldn't have worked the way it worked were it not for his brilliant introduction of Roger into the mix.
Yeah.
And Jerry Rice, as great and phenomenal as he is, also had the added advantage of not necessarily another receiver on the other side of the field to distract and so forth, but those defenses they played against, many of which had, by the way, Hall of Fame players on their squads who were designed to be on the field to stop people like Roger Craig, were unable to stop him, and thereby open the door for even greater opportunities for these other Hall of Famers on the team. It's almost as though people are trying to come up with reasons to vote against Roger, to more or less put salve on this ugliness that's in the back of, I'll say it, all of our heads, of not being able to get rid of that fumble, that unfortunate single play. And it's almost like we can't think beyond it.
Right.
I mean, first of all right, what about our defense? Our defense had an opportunity to stop the Giants. They were on their own 40-yard line. And then when you look at the field goal that was kicked, it was within inches of being missed.
Yeah.
And but for inches, or maybe a little better effort on our defense's part, you and I aren't having this session.
Yeah.
And but that's not the way the game goes. That's not the way the ball bounces. So I think, look at how he changed the game, and look at how he played it. No matter how they asked him to play it, are we supposed to deny accolades and positions of prominence to players who are multi-purposeful, who are diverse in their talents, who are capable of doing more than just one thing and playing more than one position as it's tightly defined? I don't think so. If anything, you might say that player who's capable of covering so many more areas of performance should have higher marks than this totally specialized competitor. And part of it too, what makes it so painful is Roger is such a good guy.
Yeah.
And he's such a hard worker. And he meant so much to his teammates. And he meant so much besides what he did on that playing field, what he did in the locker room and how he bought into the Walsh system and how he bought into the 49er family and so forth. I'm not sure we got as far as we got without him on this team.
Mm-hmm. Well, he is a three-time Super Bowl champion. Scored 3 touchdowns in Super Bowl 19. Then in Super Bowl 23, made some critical plays in that final drive when Joe Montana hit John Taylor to win that Super Bowl. So you're right. Maybe they don't win those 3 that they won with him. Well, they probably win the Denver one because they scored 55 points. So right. I think you win that one if I'm the running back. But so Carmen, thank you so much for your time and for helping make the case for Roger Craig. You made some great points, and I just really appreciate your time today.
Mark, thank you for the opportunity to do something that I think needs to be done, and I just pray that Roger gets a fair and square opportunity this time.
Our next guest is Randy Cross, Super Bowl champion and one of the guys who blocked for Roger Craig for almost a decade. Randy, thanks for joining us and helping us make the Hall of Fame case for Roger Craig. Tell me, why do you think that Roger's not yet in the Hall of Fame?
Yeah, I'm not really sure. I keep pretty close tabs on that, sort of on an annual basis. I think if you look at historical impact and whatnot, the case is there. He plays a position where the bogey or the standard is kind of loose. And I say loose only in that, there are guys that get into the Hall of Fame that had similar length of careers and, similar yards, whatever your criteria is. I know when I was playing, there wasn't a better all-around back than Roger Craig. Walter Payton was a better runner. There's no doubt about that. But I look at it pretty simply. It's a dwindling number of people that actually vote on this thing that have any kind of historical perspective on this for him. It's to me, it's unfortunate because, you look at a guy that came into the league in 85, right after a Super Bowl that we won. I mean, in 83, before we won the second one.
Right.
As a fullback, basically, a guy that had spent a lot of the time at Nebraska blocking for Mike Rozier. And when he came into the league, I think Bill Walsh instantly recognized what an unusual talent he was. He kept him at fullback because we had Wendell Tyler at halfback.
Yeah.
But we basically ran a 2 halfback offense. And as he sort of matriculated in his career, his role expanded even more and more. I mean, he was always asked to block. He was always asked to protect. He was always asked to run with it. I think what really set Roger apart was what a threat he was out of the backfield catching the ball. And that was something that no one had the kind of year that he finally had a couple of years later, with 1,000 rushing and 1,000 receiving. And it would be some time before anybody even touched that, by the way. So, I don't know. It's the Hall of Fame is full of guys that have done historical things. And it's full of guys that have done historical things in spurts in careers. So as to why not recognize Roger and his greatness, I really couldn't give you an honest answer. Besides the fact that I'm a little biased. I blocked for him and been in that offense and know how underappreciated a lot of things about that offense were in that era. They just didn't know, to be honest with you. It wasn't their fault. It was, it was a very East Coast centric time for the NFL where everything was the NFC East and smash mouth football and whatnot. And, we were, instead of using dynamite like many offenses did, we wore your butt down and made you play our style of football. And, they could call that finesse. They could call that whatever you want. But anybody that tried to tackle Roger Craig would tell you there's nothing about the way he played football that had anything to do with finesse.
You mentioned Walter Payton. He was one of the running backs of the 80s. I think John Riggins was on that list. Maybe Marcus Allen was on that list. Eric Dickerson.
Yeah, Eric Dickerson.
I don't know if Marcus was or not. He probably should have been. Roger Craig was on that list. But Roger's the only one on that list that's not in the Hall of Fame. In fact, he's the only one on an all-decades running back list from the 70s, 80s, or 90s that's not in the Hall of Fame. Make his case. Why does Roger Craig belong in the Hall of Fame?
Well, I think what you just said at least speaks to his qualifications pretty highly, as far as the class he was in, the group of guys that he played within an era of. Why is he not in? Because he didn't rush for over 10,000 yards. He's not in because he didn't last for 10 or 12 years. And if that was the criteria, there'd be a lot of damn Hall of Famers that wouldn't be in the Hall of Fame. But, like I said, the bogey at times at certain positions tends to kind of move. But I look at him, I look at that list that you mentioned. Riggins was a very different running back from all the other guys you mentioned. He was more of a blunt object than anything else. It was a very run-based kind of thing with that old counter tray and whatnot for Washington. And he obviously had a Hall of Fame lineman or two in front of him blocking. But Roger, was in an offense that I think utilized all his gifts, and he was able to use those gifts. And I'm not sure if you mentioned all those guys, how many of those guys. I think the only other one that has a similar history to Roger from a standpoint of gifts and taking advantage of them might be Marcus Allen, because people forget that Marcus started out doing a lot of blocking at SC. But yeah, I don't know. It's an unfortunate thing for Roger. He's one of the classiest guys you'd ever want to meet. He's a real friend, and he'd be the last guy to make his own argument. Maybe that's one of the things. And maybe you've got to be that guy that just stands up on a soapbox and tells everybody on that committee and the Hall of Fame and whatnot, you got no idea what you're doing, like it's happened on several occasions the last decade, or guys that have said, you know what, F you, I don't want it. And then we're shortly awarded.
That may be good advice. Yeah. Yeah. I talked to Mike Singletary, and Mike, when he spoke of Roger Craig, he said that he puts him up there with the greatest running backs that he ever faced. And he said, I even put him up there with my own teammate, Walter Payton, which you mentioned. How high, to me, that seems like really a great endorsement from a guy who had to try to tackle him, saying this guy belongs in the Hall of Fame. It's long overdue. Yeah. What do you think about that statement as somebody who was blocking for him, hearing the words from Mike Singletary, who had to try and stop him?
I think it's about as honest a evaluation as you could ask for from a true competitor and a contemporary, like Mike. I mean, if there was a defense that was the nemesis of the 49er offense during that era, it would have been Singletary and the Bears defense, and Buddy Ryan and, the 46, and go down that whole list of the conflicts that we had. But, I would look at, if you're talking about Bear Niner games, there were games where they got us at Soldier Field and whatnot. But, and the two biggest games we ever played were NFC Championship games. Look and see how Roger did in those games and what he did, and guys like Jerry and guys like Joe. And I think Mike's very, very humble, and he throws high praise like that for contemporaries around like manhole covers. So, you got to pay attention when a guy like Mike says something like that.
Yeah, definitely do. Randy, thanks so much for joining us and helping us make the case for Roger Craig.
Thank you. Hopefully a lot of us will be rewarded with that notification here in the short future. But, we'll see if people smart up a little bit.
That's Randy Cross. My next guest is Jesse Sapolu. Jesse has known Roger Craig for many years because they came in the same draft in 1983. And so Jesse knows Roger Craig full well because he blocked for him many, many times. Welcome, Jesse Sapolu, the 4-time Super Bowl champion, right?
Yes.
You were on the 84 Super Bowl team and the 94 Super Bowl team. So that's a pretty cool accomplishment. So tell me what it was like coming in that same draft as Roger Craig. How long did it take for you to get to notice him and to see that maybe he was going to be something special?
Well, we came in together. He was our first pick. We didn't have a first rounder, and I was our last pick because we didn't have a 12th rounder. So they roomed us together. I think I impressed during minicamp, so they figured they're going to room me with our first pick. But right away, you could tell the versatility of Roger Craig. People need to understand that there was a lot of sacrifices that a lot of these players made for this organization to win Super Bowls, because Roger did not start off as a tailback. We put him at fullback to sacrifice his career in the beginning. And, as we went along, when Tyler retired, we moved Roger to tailback. And obviously everybody knows that he was the first NFL player in history to go over 1,000 as a receiver and 1,000 rushing the ball on the ground. That's a very difficult accomplishment under the rules at the time. The rules have changed now. So, you have to appreciate what he's done. What people need to understand that, a lot of people say, the Hall of Fame is an individual award. But at the same time, they need to dig deep into the organization and the history of that organization and see what each individual player contributed to that dynasty. There's a lot of sacrifice that goes into it. And I know Roger Craig has done the ultimate sacrifice to put this organization on the map. When we get introduced at Candlestick or at Levi Stadium now, even the fans now that probably were too young to recognize what we did explode because they understand that those 5 trophies in the case in Santa Clara was done by this era of football players. And Roger Craig, no doubt, was one of the most important pieces of that particular time.
Right. And you mentioned how he sacrificed part of his career. I'm assuming you're meaning that he played fullback. And so his numbers, because one of the arguments against Roger Craig being in the Hall of Fame, or maybe not one of the arguments, but one of the reasons why younger voters might not vote him in is because he doesn't have what they perceive as the numbers that he would have needed, which if you understand that he played fullback for his first couple of seasons at least, then that he probably would have had greater numbers. Did you see a difference in his play? I know there wasn't a difference in his attitude from fullback to halfback, but was there a difference in his play? Did you see him once he became the guy and it wasn't just, Wendell Tyler's fullback? Did you see him kind of take off at that point?
Well, I saw someone that had the mentality of a true tailback, that I felt like he was right at home when we switched him to tailback. Bill Walsh used Roger as a fullback to block for Wendell Tyler, but because he had the versatility to come out of the backfield as a fullback and mismatch some of those linebackers to cover him, that was a sacrifice he made in the beginning part of his career. Mm-hmm. And like I said, whenever you have a dynasty year, you're going to have some superstars that come out right away because they played one position. But there's also a lot of people that sacrifice to get the team to where it is. And Roger Craig, no doubt in my mind, was one of those players. And it's so unfair to see him last this long and not get voted in. And me and him sure about it, understanding that the voters need to dig in instead of just looking at numbers, look at what the value of that particular player is, because we play this game for one reason and one reason only. The first choice is not to get into the Hall of Fame, it's to become a champion.
Right.
And that's what Roger has done. That's what he has done at 2 different positions. And there's no doubt in my mind that it's been long overdue for this man. Enough is enough. I think he needs to get in right away.
What do you think that would mean to him to finally get into the Hall of Fame, especially after all of the years of having to wait?
Well, I think he would appreciate it. I think he would get excited, but at the same time, it would be a relief because, not to compare our dynasty to any other dynasty, but now when we watch how some of these great 49er teams is just trying to get their 6th trophy, Mm-hmm. But when we were playing at the time, we just wanted to win, and now looking back on it, to go 5-0 in the big game, 5-0 now, not losing one.
Right.
It's amazing. And not to discredit what Buffalo has done, but they got a lot of players in the Hall of Fame, and they're 0-4 in the game. So, I mean, you ask yourself, what do we play this game for? So you can't just go on stats. You gotta weigh the value of each particular player. Yeah, there's some 49ers that have rings that played on special teams, and they played an important role. But what about players that played key roles in making sure that dynasty happened? That has to be digged into as a voter, because at the end of the day, that's what the game is all about. It's an individual award, but there are individuals that play key roles, sacrifice personal stats to play key roles to get that done. And I think the voters need to look at that.
Steve Young said that Roger Craig was a thermostat player on and off the field. How did he make you guys better? How did he raise the temperature of the locker room on and off the field?
Well, his energy, how excited he is to play the game. We all talk about Jerry Rice's work ethic, and Roger Craig was right up there with Jerry. I mean, there were the two guys that set the standard in a certain way of when we run a play, they ran it all the way to the end zone and sprint back to get back into the huddle, for the next play. It made everybody raise their standard of play. There was when you talk about our years as 49ers, we always talk about the standard. And that's a standard that even today, when I talk to a draft class that's coming in, because sometimes they have me come in there to speak about what it is to be a 49er. It's that particular standard. And there's no question Roger Craig was a major part of that standard. And that's what I spoke about. Looking back on it, I can't believe we went 5-0 and not lose one. How difficult it is just to win one championship. It was a special group, and I was honored to play with these guys. And there's no question my teammate Roger Craig was a special member of that group.
Yeah, we're seeing it now with Kyle Shanahan's team getting close to the Super Bowl, getting in the Super Bowl, and not quite finishing it. So you're right, to win 5 is quite the testament, and you guys made it look easy. They never, Jerry and Roger, they never got you up on that hill?
No, it's a good thing. It's a good thing. I live in LA and I work out in LA, but now they have OTAs where they all work out together. Back in the day, you had to be motivated as an individual to make sure you push yourself to the brink. So when you come into minicamp, everybody's ready to go. And, Jerry's workout and Roger's workout is renowned up on that hill. And I haven't had the chance to experience it, but I knew myself that I had to come in tip-top shape because that was the standard that was expected of me.
Yeah. And Roger Craig set that standard and he kept it high for the rest of you. Jesse, thanks so much. You're a great champion, and I appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you, Mark. Appreciate it.
All right, we have Super Bowl champion Guy McIntyre joining us here today to talk 49ers Hall of Fame candidacy for Roger Craig. Guy, thanks so much for joining us. Let's get right into this. Why do you think that Roger Craig is not in the Hall of Fame?
I don't know that. All I do is know that if you go by numbers and things that have been accomplished, that he's right up there with and surpassed some other guys. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure why not. I mean, that's something that the voters would have to answer, because they're in the room.
Right. Yeah, he definitely has the numbers. He has the championships. He has everything that you want to put into it. Now, you blocked for him for many years. So tell me why he deserves to be in the Hall of Fame.
Well, like you said, the numbers. I mean, that's what you go by. I mean, you go by the numbers. I mean, he was on a championship team. He was a major factor and the championships that we won. You know, when I was a rookie, he was a major factor, you know, and throughout the years. I mean, he put up the numbers. He was consistent. He was a blocker. He was a catcher. He was, you know, he did everything.
Yeah. What year did you come into the league?
I came in '84, the second Super Bowl.
Okay, so you were with him for all of the 3 Super Bowls that he won.
Right.
So some people will hold the 1990 NFC Championship fumble against him. Is it how unfair is it to, if a voter keeps him out, how unfair is it to hold that one play against him, considering there were a lot of things that took place after that fumble that allowed the Giants to get into field goal range and kick the field goal? How unfair is that argument?
I think that's very unfair. I mean, it's a big stage, it's a big game, and I mean, running backs fumble, things happen. But it shouldn't be one thing that keeps you out like that.
Right.
You know, that's saying, oh, this negates everything that you've done your entire career.
Right.
And it comes down to one fumble, you know?
Yeah, it's like players don't get elected into the Hall of Fame based on one play. And so it seems to me that one play shouldn't keep you out as well. Knowing Roger like you do, what would it mean to him to get into the Hall of Fame? Oh,
I mean, knowing Roger, it would be fantastic. I mean, he would be elated. He would be, you know, a great person to represent the Hall of Fame. You know, his personality, his likeness. I mean, everything about him, you know, would suit him being into the Hall of Fame. I mean, he would embrace it. He would respect it, you know, and it just would be, you know, a great honor for him.
Yeah. Mike Singletary talks about how Roger Craig was a mismatch for defenses, that he was a nightmare. And in fact, he holds Roger in such high regard that he puts him right up there with Walter Payton. How does the fact that he was a mismatch, how did that benefit the 49ers offense and benefit what Bill Walsh was trying to do?
Well, one of the things that Bill Walsh required from his running backs was that you be able to catch the ball out of the backfield.
Right.
You just wasn't a runner and a block, you know, but you catch the ball out of the backfield, because that was kind of that safety route when if Jerry or whoever was covered downfield, we go get it to the running back and he's got a lot of space, and Roger could make things happen.
Right.
You get Roger in the open field, he could make you miss. He would make you miss.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and that was a mismatch because he's on a linebacker. You know, and the only other linebackers that could probably keep up with him was Lawrence Taylor or somebody like that.
Right.
You know? And that's a Hall of Famer. You know? So, but he could catch the ball, he could block, he could run, he could do it all. I mean, he could do it all. You know, he could make you miss, he could run power, he could, you know. Back then, we didn't have a lot of zone. We ran a lot of, you know, counters. We ran a lot of 18 bobs, you know, outside sweeps and things of that nature. So, I mean, that was the mismatch, that being able to catch the ball coming out of the backfield.
Yeah. And I still can, in my mind, see you pulling and leading the way. Thanks so much, Guy, for your time and for all that you're doing. Hope the best for you and for the 49ers and all that you're doing there. Thank you so much for joining us for the Hall of Fame case of Roger Craig. We hope that you've learned some things and that you enjoyed watching or listening wherever that might be. Thanks again.